All right, everybody, welcome back in to 2 on OSU. I'm Ben Hutchens, joined as always by my identical twin brother and beat reporter Sam Hutchens. Sam, it was quite the week, and it's been quite the last couple of weeks around Stillwater talking about these Oklahoma State Cowboys. And we'll get into what a crazy week and how impressive they looked last Saturday against the Jayhawks. But first, we want to thank some sponsors for supporting 2 on OSU. They've been with us for a while now, and we just thank MidFirst Bank, Laserlight Skin Clinic, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Oklahoma Ford Dealers, and Fire Lake Casino for their support of our show and everything we're doing at Sellout Crowd. And we also want to remind all of you folks to drive into your best Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Remember, Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Sam, Cowboys looked like the best team in Oklahoma last Saturday. OU wasn't playing, so that helped. But they looked great.
Yeah, and Ben, credit to where credit's due. You had them in the last 2 on OSU. That was your prediction again. You had Oklahoma State beating Kansas State and beating KU. So they did it. They swept the Kansas teams, which that sounded maybe a little absurd a couple weeks ago, but the Cowboys put up 39 points, 39 whopping points to win 39-32, pick up their first ranked win of the year. And yeah, Ben, there's a lot of Cowboys that you can credit for this win.
Yeah, 39 points feels like the new 49 compared to what we've watched OSU this last season and a half, really. 39 points feels like a lot. And it took a lot of Cowboys to get there, but mostly Ollie Gordon. I mean, he was kind of the OSU offense, and it all started on that screenplay. For the first of the game, Ollie Gordon busted down the left sideline for a big play, and I mean, the Big 12 recognized him. He had 284 total yards. Good for Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. Ollie Gordon, he looked great.
Yeah, that's right, Ben. And that he was the talk of Saturday, deservedly so, into the weekend. Ollie Gordon, the Cowboys star who they've leaned on, who I would really credit or at least point out to as equally deserving of recognition for the Cowboys' 2-game turnaround has been OSU's offensive line. You could just look at the eye test. Gordon had holes. Think about that first screenplay on the first play of the game, Ben. Ollie caught the ball. The O-line had set it up, nice play call by Dunn on the script to start the game, but Ollie wasn't even touched until, he was 50 yards down the field, it felt like. So the offensive line was protecting Bowman well, which set up Bowman for success. The offensive line was carving holes in the middle of the KU defensive front to really clear some lanes for Ollie Gordon. And Ollie's the type of guy, he doesn't really need a lane to make good plays. So when you do give him a lane, and when the first person that's touching him is a linebacker or a safety that's crashing in run support, then he is really, really hard to stop. So 289, that's what it was. That's what you get when the offensive line's playing well.
Yeah, and one thing about that screenplay to open the game, of course we asked Casey Dunn about it and Mike Gundy about it after the game, and they said, we've had that in the game plan for a while now. We knew we wanted that play in because we knew it could go a long way, maybe even a touchdown. I don't think that big chunk play to start the game surprised anybody on the OSU sideline because Mike Gundy told us they identified the Kansas Jayhawks defense. The Jayhawks were in too deep. We've talked a lot about that secondary with guys like Kobe Bryant back there who, boy, he could have really changed the game with his dropped interception. But the way Kansas plays, Sam, they're playing two deep guys, really avoiding the big play, and it allowed OSU to kind of dink and dunk its way down the field. And we saw Ollie Gordon catch a number of passes. He caught the touchdown on the first drive too in the flat. So OSU, I think, of course the offensive line's been playing better. That's what Gundy talked about today. But it was also a big win for the coaching and, of course, a big win for Ollie Gordon.
Yeah, Casey Dunn can take a breath. It's funny, the goalposts kind of move a little bit, and not to defend him one way or the other, because it certainly seems like he's been at fault, and he's kind of put his hand up and say some of this is on me, the early season struggles. But it is funny now to see folks say, well, if you would have done this earlier, you'd be 6-0. And maybe that's the case. It certainly does feel like if the Cowboys had committed to trot Bowman out there against Central Arkansas and feed it to Ollie Gordon, it feels like the Cowboys would be better than 4-2 right now. But it was certainly a weekend for Casey Dunn and company to collect some flowers as well. And Ben, I just want to say, one thing before we finish talking about Ollie Gordon. I asked Mike Gundy about that today in the walk-off. Was, Mike, what sort of, what's your surprise level that the offensive line has really turned it around? Because that's who Gundy credited for Oklahoma State's big game on Saturday. He said the offensive line really protected well and blocked well. I asked Mike, is rare the right word to see a type of turnaround like this? And he said maybe rare is not the right word. That's maybe going a little too far, but he did say the turnaround has been pretty exceptional. So we'll dive into that a little more later in the week. But I think that's where we can pinpoint the start of Oklahoma State's change from the team that got bullied by the South Alabama Jaguars to a team that, K-State and KU, good defenses, good defensive lines. And OSU was kind of the team doing the bullying. So we'll see if it translates to the road, Ben. I know you're going to Morgantown.
I sure am. And we'll get into the Morgantown game. Mike Gundy talked a little bit about the Mountaineers today, and we'll preview that matchup, especially coming up with our next episode. But I know, Sam, you wanted to touch on the defense, and that's something you wrote about. Look, I mean, the narrative of what we talk about after games can change so easily with OSU's defense coming up with 4 critical fourth down stops and turnovers at the end of that game to give the Cowboys a win. What got into the OSU defense, and do you think it can continue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I pretty much asked it, to Brian Nardo verbatim, because you have to. Because if you think about it, and I'm sure everyone at home was screaming at their TVs, how's Kansas's tight end getting wide open and, on the seam route and exposing OSU in the first half. And then in the second half, OSU closed that game with 2 turnovers, 2 turnover on downs forced. And then the last possession Kansas had of the game, the clock hit 0-0. So the Cowboys were incredible at closing. It kind of reminded me, Ben, of a baseball game when your starter gets rocked a little bit, but your offense keeps up, and then in the 6th inning, it's maybe 8-8, and then your relievers come in and pitch a shutout, because that's what it felt like. Cowboys were losing at halftime. Jason Bean had thrown for 4 touchdowns at the half and dominated OSU, and then Cowboys really closed in the second half. So what changed? They unleashed Colin Oliver, and that sounds like something that OSU should have just done from the start, right? Unleash Colin Oliver, but you have to think about it. What Kansas did so well was run the option play. Jason Bean, Gundy said postgame, Bean's the fastest player on Kansas. So Brian Nardo said he was worried about the option play. And with Oliver being on the edge, if you send Oliver in on a blitz, then if Bean runs out to that side and has the pitch man, that's just one less Cowboy that the Nardo has that can run after those guys and get a stop. So once Nardo realized, hey, Kansas isn't really running too many option plays, he said, all right, Colin, blitz a little more. And Colin had 2.5 sacks, career high, so monster game. And that the Cowboys ended up getting more pressure in the second half to force Bean into bad plays and to force the KU offense into hard to manage 3rd and 4th down situations.
The turnovers, I feel like, with this OSU defense have been the difference maker. The turnovers were noticeably lacking in, through non-conference play and in that Iowa State game. It just wasn't happening. The Cowboys weren't forcing enough pressure on the quarterback, like you said, to force those plays or, punching the ball out for fumbles and stuff. But these last 2 weeks, like we've talked about the offense and how much better it looks, but the defense is creating turnovers, which I think is going to have to be the way the Oklahoma State defense finds success this season. They fixed the tackling issue. We talked about that. Tackling is no longer a problem. But we've seen for a while now kind of busts in the secondary, and it's become a noticeable trend to the point where I think it's probably an issue. We saw it again with Kansas, the Jayhawks getting wide open on several plays, and I don't think it's going to get marginally better throughout the rest of the season because OSU has so much problems with depth in the secondary. They're really missing Lyric Rawls out there right now. So I don't know if it's going to get corrected a whole lot. I think it could get corrected some, but I think the Cowboys are going to be giving up big plays, and the only way to counteract those big plays is to create turnovers.
And Ben, here's what Xavier Benson told me post game that I thought was, pretty telling. He said it was frustrating because when KU wasn't kind of just scheming a guy open, the Cowboys were playing pretty well on defense. Even in that first half, when there wasn't a wide open Jayhawk, the Cowboys were doing a pretty good job containing KU. It was just, hey, one play that someone misses an assignment or, Kansas schemes guy open, your whole drive just goes kaput, and it's 6 on the board right then. But here's something I missed in all that. And maybe it's because it's hard to notice things that aren't happening. But the Cowboys had 3 missed tackles, Ben. That's a Pro Football Focus stat that you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, 3 missed tackles. This was the team that, let me pull up my numbers real quick. The Cowboys had been getting shredded on missed tackling early in the year against teams like Central Arkansas and Arizona State. So that's a thing where I asked Gundy about it, and Gundy said it for me. He's like, oh, we were awful in the early season of missed tackling. So the Cowboys have really restored that.
Yeah. Now, Sam, it seems kind of crazy, but here we are at the midpoint of OSU's season. Does that seem real to you? It's already halfway through?
No, because it feels like we've lived through 3 separate seasons already with the whole quarterback in flux deal, like the missed tackling, that was an issue. And then, you go through the Oklahoma State is terrible phase and the Cowboys do not look good and they dropped to 0-1 in conference play. And now the last mini season has been the Cowboys beating 2 good teams from the state of Kansas that you're like, oh my gosh, now everything's in front of this team. So no, it feels like 3 seasons already.
I mean, yeah, like that's exactly what I was getting at. It's kind of crazy just to think about where the Cowboys were 2 weeks ago versus 4 weeks ago versus at the start of the season. How many answers we've sought and then gotten and then had to ask again. It's crazy. I mean, but right now the Cowboys are on a 2-game win streak. They're sitting at 4-2 overall and 2-1 in the Big 12. And they got some winnable games coming up, Sam. I mean, West Virginia next week is 4-2, 2-1 in the Big 12. Cincinnati, homecoming the week after that, they're below 500 and they're 0-3 in the Big 12. And after that is OU, which is building up to be a massive game. So I just kind of wanted to get your take on what the Cowboys are sitting at right now. I mean, do you feel any different? Is Bedlam going to be a huge game, or are the Cowboys trending toward a bowl? I certainly think so.
Yeah. No, they're almost locked into a bowl now with, like you said, Ben, preseason conjecture about early schedules versus, quote, hard schedules. A lot of times you can throw that out the window. And to a certain extent, the Cowboys missing Baylor seems a lot less fortuitous than it looked in the early part of the year. But regardless of that, the Cowboys do have the 4 new schools left on the schedule, none of whom have looked exceptionally great so far. And you're right. Bedlam is shaping up to be a huge game. I think, Ben, that the Cowboys could conceivably win out until Bedlam, setting up a wild night game as Bedlam tends to be, quote unquote, the last Bedlam. I can't even imagine the hype around that. It would probably be college game day, just looking at the other games that day. And, if the Cowboys can get to that game with just one conference loss, then everything becomes on the table. Even against a team that's shaping up, looking like it's a lot superior in the Sooners right now. So that's exactly right. The Cowboys have salvaged, they've fought, they've scrapped. Mike Gundy said, in a nod to the tackling thing, he's run the most physical practices of his coaching career, and OSU has flipped a switch this last 2 games to really salvage their season and, again, put everything on the table. Do you feel the same way?
Certainly. I mean, as weird as it is to say, I guess everything is still on the table for the Cowboys in terms of a Big 12 championship and a New Year's Six Bowl and all of that. It feels like whoever is the third best team in the Big 12 is going to be in a really good spot because I think there's a clear top 2 in the Big 12. And I don't think many people would argue that. But somebody's going to be that third team. And Cowboys have as good of a shot as anybody to be that third team.
Here's the thing, though. Oklahoma State has not looked good on the road. And that's worth reiterating with another road game coming up in a difficult spot to play in Morgantown is the Arizona State game. Look, Arizona State's just not good. So the Cowboys kind of struggled in that game in Tempe. That was not great. And then they, of course, lost in Ames. Another difficult spot to play. But, the Cowboys have been great at home. And that's a historic thing. Gundy's great at home as an underdog. So those two wins against Kansas and Kansas State are impressive. But you got to win games on the road if you want to be the third best team in the Big 12, if you want to be making noise in the mix as the dark horse spoiler to kick either OU or Texas out of their trip to Arlington for a rematch of that. So the Cowboys, they need to start winning on the road, Ben. And I haven't really seen them play winning football on the road so far. Obviously, they were 1-1, but it hasn't been great.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we talk about the Cowboys being in a much better spot now than they were 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And I think it got brought up with Gundy today. Does it all kind of make you look back and think, well, if we would have gone to Bowman and Ollie Gordon sooner, what would this season have looked like? Now, Gundy said, hey, he doesn't get caught up in moving back in the past, and he reminded us, hey, I don't necessarily think it's Bowman and Gordon that have kind of changed things. I think it's just the offensive line blocking better. But Sam, I mean, that's what podcasts and shows are made for. Well, we can go back and think about what this season could have been. How do you think things would have ended up if maybe Alan Bowman would have gotten all the snaps in the preseason? I mean, is this something we can even think about?
It'd be a little disingenuous not to think about it, or at least consider, that was the biggest decision the Cowboys made. And I guess it does feel like it was made too late. The quarterback battle, it was pretty even. Alan Bowman maybe didn't even truly win the quarterback battle, at least not on Saturday on TV. We don't have privy to anything but the last few seconds of practice on Monday nights. But, it was pretty even. So it does bring up the thought, hey, if you had just gone with the guy and maybe been able to realize that in the early part of the year against Central Arkansas or even in the preseason, the Cowboys have looked better. And Ollie Gordon came out and said it post-game, Ben. I think you were there. I wasn't in that huddle. I just saw the quote. But were you in that huddle when Ollie Gordon, he kind of said what a lot of us have been thinking is it certainly helps an offense to have chemistry with one guy.
Yeah, me and about 20 other reporters were all gathered around Ollie Gordon at the end of last game, of course, the hero. So yeah, and I don't want to, say a quote. I don't have it written down or anything, but he kind of said generally just how much better the offense has flowed since establishing a quarterback. He said you can kind of feel it up front. You can feel that everywhere. That consistency. It's super helpful for an offense. So, and I think, credit to Mike Gundy for going with Bowman because it's worked out well. The decision, a lot of people, we talked a lot about how split the OSU fan base was on each of those three guys. So Gundy did eventually make a decision, and it looks like the right decision. We just wonder if that decision would have been made earlier, where the Cowboys would be. But Sam, we're gonna get into our 2-minute drill here, and it's been a fun little thing to do where we each get asked 2 questions. We try and get under 2 minutes. This first topic is pretty pertinent, Sam, with Terry Miller getting inducted into the OSU football Ring of Honor at halftime of last Saturday's game. Sam, it brings up an interesting question. There's 4 guys in there. Of course, Barry Sanders, Thurman Thomas, Bob Finnemore, and now Miller. 2-minute drill. Who should be the next Cowboy in the Ring of Honor?
The Cowboys need some defense in the Ring of Honor. And I know it's not what Oklahoma State's known for, but it's what Leslie O'Neal was known for. He was a Cowboy who played in the 80s for Oklahoma State. He ended up being NFL draft first-round pick, 8 overall. So some folks might know him from playing for the Chargers or the Rams or the Chiefs. But Leslie O'Neal, Ben, was a D end and a linebacker who was a beast at Oklahoma State. So I think he's more than worthy of being OSU's first defensive player in the Ring of Honor. I say you gotta put him in. He was great for the Cowboys. Big 8 player of the year. Only a handful of players can claim that. So get him in there.
All right, I'm going to go with Justin Blackmon for the next Cowboy I think should be inducted into the OSU Ring of Honor. You might be skipping a couple generations here, but I think Blackmon is a guy to make that leap within and get like a modern player, someone who played in Boone Pickens Stadium in the Ring of Honor. I think that's important, and Blackmon, of course, is more than deserving just from his on-field accolades. Two-time Bolitnikoff Award winner. He was on some fantastic Cowboy teams, and I would say is one of the faces of kind of modern OSU athletic success. Justin Blackmon needs to be in there. Next 2-minute drill question, Sam. Of course, we got to talk more about Ollie Gordon. Who does he remind you of? What's your Ollie Gordon comp?
I'm going to go to the NFL on this one. We could have gone around the Big 12 or wherever else, but I think a good comp for Ollie Gordon NFL-wise, he has a little Dalvin Cook in him. Cook, played at Florida State and now plays for the Minnesota Vikings. New York Jets now made his money with the Vikings, but Cook, I looked up the height and weight. Cook is 5'10", 209. Ollie Gordon is 6'1", 212. So similar frame, but I think the three down nature of both guys, we're just now seeing it from Ollie Gordon, but it's what Dalvin Cook was great at. He can really pound you through the middle, halfback dive type stuff and be great between the tackles. But he's also great on outside swing passes, screen passes. They were both great. So Ollie Gordon flashed a little Dalvin Cook, which to me tells me he can be a success at the next level too one day.
I'll keep my comparison closer to home. I'm going to go with Justice Hill. And Sam, I think that's just because of speed. I mean, Justice Hill is obviously one of the fastest running backs OSU's had here in recent memory. Maybe him and Chuba are up there battling out for that. But the thing about Ollie Gordon, of course, you see the frame. What I noticed, Sam, is how Ollie Gordon changes the angles for defensive backs. Those defensive backs and secondary members, they'll crash at him, Sam. But by the time they get closer to him, they're behind Ollie Gordon. Their angle is not right just because they don't anticipate or they aren't ready for the speed that Ollie Gordon brings to the table. So I think that's my comp for Ollie Gordon.
That's not one I would have thought of right away, but I can get behind it. I appreciate that argument. It's crazy what he's done from a quarterback in high school, who had mostly quarterback highlights, but it didn't take a college level coach to think, I wonder what that guy could do at running back. So it's crazy what he's become, and he could be, some folks were throwing around, mostly on Twitter, RBU for Oklahoma State, and the Cowboys Ring of Honor would certainly indicate that they've had some success developing that position. Maybe Ollie Gordon's next. He was really impressive, Ben. That was a game that will really stick with you.
No doubt about it. And we just want to tell all of our 2 on OSU listeners and supporters, look, I mean, if this is your first time hearing or watching, be sure to subscribe. And we can talk to you twice a week about the Cowboys and Cowboy football. As basketball season rolls around, we'll be talking basketball, softball, baseball. We won't stop even when the semester does. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube or follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your OSU content. And if you like what you hear, leave us a review. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on 2 on OSU.